Hello everybody, I'm Barbara and welcome to Module 1 on Flexible Curriculum Design. The topic for this, Topic 1, is what is flexible curriculum design? And before we go there, we need to backtrack even further and think about what is curriculum. Well, it's a very contested term. There are a number of different notions of what curriculum are, and we're going to go into that. And these may shift based on different contexts, different teaching and learning approaches, as well as on the policies of countries. The Department of Higher Education and Training, however, has adopted a notion of curriculum as being the intended outcomes to be achieved, what knowledge, content, competencies and skills, and levels of performance that are required, that are expected from students. So, in other words, their definition is curriculum is about what is to be taught, what students must learn, and what is to be assessed. And it seems very straightforward, but a problem I have about that is it makes no mention of how learning is to take place. So it's all about the what, but not about the how. The DHET also speaks about three components of curriculum. So the intended curriculum, which is the documented curriculum, what you write down, your planning, that describes the depth, breadth, and level of difficulty and cognitive demand of what is required for the purpose of the qualification. Then there is the enacted curriculum, which is the actual delivery of curriculum, which includes things like institutional leadership and management, ethos and values that affect the curriculum and how it's enacted, teaching and learning activities, student support that's being offered, and even institutional performance and of course quality management. So how is this being enacted? And then the final component is assessment, and that's a vital one. So not only assessment of learning internally to the department, but externally the evaluation of how learning is assessed, of the intended curriculum. So evaluation of the intended as well as the enacted curriculum. Curriculum then has to do with, if we unpack it a bit, it has to do with determining the purpose and the values of learning, needs of the learners, outcomes and learning objectives, and then from this, selecting the content and subject matter. So we're seeing it as quite a sort of process working from the top down, purpose and values, needs of the learners. Okay, what are the learning objectives? What is going to underpin that then? How are we going to achieve those through the content? What sort of activities are we going to include there? What are the methods and approaches? Are we going to involve students? Are we going to be involved in co-creating knowledge with our students? How will assessment be done? And then planning the overall effectiveness, so the evaluation of the delivery of the curriculum, which takes us through the whole process. And in fact, when you come to documenting your program design, these are exactly the areas that you will need to spend quite a lot of time on unpacking and documenting them. In the South African context then, curriculum is particularly quite broad and involving standard settings, development and delivery of learning programs, and the quality assurance of learning programs. TUI has come up with a curriculum design model at program level, and this is really helpful in understanding the various aspects that need careful consideration in the development of new programs. Although it does support a step-by-step process, this is this diagram, looks at it as a very step-by-step process. It is, however, a very relational process and often far more iterative than this. So the appropriate delivery, teaching and learning and assessment methods will be very much influenced, for instance, by the student profile. The need and demand for the program will determine what is taught and why. Okay, so everything impacts on everything else, but it's very nicely laid out like this to show the steps that need to be considered and gone through in the development of your program design. Taking the term curriculum as a contested term, it's also quite important to understand our approaches to curriculum. So what do we actually understand? What do we understand by this? How does this affect what we do? There are several approaches, different approaches have been identified. For instance, the transmission approach, which deals with really curriculum seen as a syllabus to be delivered. The curriculum is packages of information to be delivered to students who need to absorb and assimilate it and then reproduce it when asked. So this is very much a teacher-centered approach. Then their curriculum is often seen as product, where students have to master certain skills and learning and know certain facts. And this follows the notion that measured inputs result in measurable outputs. So, for instance, our old Technikon curricula in the 1990s took a skills-based product approach. And this was highly influenced by the outcomes-driven education system at the time. But more recently, curriculum is being seen as process, where the interaction of teachers, students, and knowledge is really important. So it's concerned with learning activities, with student learning experiences, with the enacted curriculum. So this focuses very much on the enacted curriculum. And we would say that this is a more student-centered approach to curriculum. Context is, of course, really important. So context does shape, in very important ways, our curriculum, because curriculum has to be relevant to our students as well as to the world of work. And then emerging very recently is this idea of curriculum in higher education as praxis. In adult education, curriculum has been seen as praxis for a long time, but it's coming into higher education now. And this is seen as a very dynamic and interactive social learning practice. So it has a transformative and emancipatory focus. Learners need to be active participants in the learning program, and their learning experiences should be meaningful. So all learning experiences should be meaningful to the learner. Learning then has a critical focus. It's critically reflective and deals with issues of power and interest in the classroom. So a praxis approach to curriculum could help us address decolonization of higher education. It focuses on knowing, doing, and being. In other words, the development of self, the holistic being within a specific community and society for learners that they need to develop in the process of education. So a praxis approach allows us to pay attention to the social context in which curriculum is created and to ask questions such as who creates the curriculum, in whose interest, who is included, who is excluded, what forms of knowledge are valued, what resources are we drawing upon, do we know our students, what knowledges, experiences and challenges are they bringing to the classroom, and are we incorporating that into the learning process? So understanding our approaches to curriculum are important, and it's an area that we all need to really think about quite carefully, and how this is affecting the way we teach and learn, and should we be shifting our perspective on curriculum and our approaches to it. And if we're going to be involved in flexible curriculum, we will have to shift our positionality and think about what flexible curriculum is. Now, before we think about what actually curriculum is, perhaps we need to address the why question. So why are we thinking of flexible curriculum? Well, we know that there are global challenges in higher education related to things like massification of higher education, where it is easily available through online learning, MOOCs, and so on and so forth. And also opening our doors to non-traditional students, which were previously excluded. So our student profile is changing rapidly. In addition, at the same time there's massification, there's dwindling public funding and hugely increasing student debt. And this is happening, we know, across the world. It's not just a South African phenomenon. It is globally a huge problem. And coupled with this is that there's graduate underpreparedness for the workplace, as well as many of our students, being non-traditional students, not being prepared for higher education. So we have lack of preparedness at both ends, at the input end and at the exit level. And we also need to reconceptualize our roles as higher education institutions in terms of this massification and in terms of the rapidly and easily available knowledge and courses and education online, where people are able to do short courses and particularly just-in-time short courses for the workplace, where people don't have time to attend higher education institutions or who can't afford the cost. So why globally there are a number of challenges, and then locally, from a South African perspective, it is being encouraged by the Centre for Higher Education, promoting flexible distance and open learning programs. We're also being forced to consider it through student protests that we've endured recently around high university fees, westernized curricula, and the fact that so many students have been excluded from studying further through debt or through academic exclusion as well. And in addition to that, higher education has not kept pace with the rapidly changing world or the needs of our students. So we're not able to keep pace with the changing workplace, despite cutting edge research and innovation. So really, unless we start adopting more flexible ways, and in particular online, mobile, and blended learning, we are not going to be able to keep pace with the demand for learning that is happening worldwide, and we will simply not survive. So what then is flexible curriculum design, and how do we go about it? So firstly, we need to design with our students in mind. Because the student profile is changing. They are no longer what we consider traditional students. Many of them are employed, particularly in those who come into postgraduate programs, and they need more flexible ways in which we can deliver the learning material, and including online and mobile learning. So who are our students? What are their needs as learning adults? They also bring rich and diverse knowledge into the classroom, experiences in the workplace, authentic economic and socio-cultural knowledge. And we need to think how we can use this rich resource in our curriculum development. We also need to prepare our students not for the predictable workplace that we're used to, but for a rapidly changing future. There may not be formal jobs in 20 years' time, so they need to become independent and lifelong learners. They need to be able to learn just in time. They need to be able to access knowledge and work with it and use it for their various purposes. And through this process of flexible learning, we need to provide flexible and appropriate support, realizing that one size does not fit all. From the design aspect, we need to take a learning-centered perspective. We need to be informed by theories of learning. So what are these? We need to understand what learning is. Social constructivist theories of learning. Perhaps we need to take a critical realist approach. What are the different ways of learning that students engage in? We need to provide rich, interactive learning environments to enable the social construction of knowledge. And also to enable the integration of knowledge, skills, and behaviors, the development of the holistic learner. Not just the knowledge aspect, not just the skills aspect, but understanding that these need to be integrated in order for learners to become lifelong learners and to be able to act and perform and take on responsible roles in the workplace and in civil life. And we also need to engage in diverse and authentic forms of assessment, not just exam-driven, not just paper-driven, but authentic forms of assessment that will reflect these different ways of learning and different knowledges. So a design approach is needed to curriculum development. And why a design approach? Because these days, design thinking is becoming more and more important. We see it in business, we see it in education more and more, we see it in all spheres of life. Design thinking is becoming an essential competency in order to solve complex problems. And design thinking enables us to collaborate, with other stakeholders, and come up with innovative solutions. It brings multiple perspectives on the problems, and not just a single lens, but multiple perspectives, which is needed for complex problems. And it also helps us understand teaching as a design science, as not just as a mechanistic performance and not just as a matter of transmission or a product approach. And if we take a design approach where we bring multiple perspectives and we bring multiple stakeholder views into the design, then we can make sure we do design a curriculum that is fit for purpose. And this is all very well, but it does come with big challenges. And the big challenge I think we have as educators is how do we design the curriculum flexibly enough while still making sure that the students are grounded in a firm foundation in their disciplinary knowledge, in their disciplinary field. So it's not all about doing, it's not all about being, it's also about the knowledge. And how do we make sure that these all are integrated in particular ways to make sure that students not only know and can perform in the disciplinary field, but they can also respond to changing contexts, and it does actually meet their needs. And this has huge implications for our roles as educators. We may have thought of curriculum development as a very technicist, mechanistic exercise, but in fact it's not. If we are to meet the needs of our learners and of the changing workplace, we need to take a much more flexible and approach, much more design-centered approach, and realize that curriculum development is a dynamic and creative process. We need to see the big picture, and we need to view ourselves as empowered professionals in this design activity, and really take on this role of teaching as a design science. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this module. I've just included a few references here that I have referred to in the course of this presentation. Thank you, and I'll see you in module 2.